Happy Monday, everyone. Today is February 16th, 2026. It is President's Day, a day when we usually look back at the giants who built this nation. But while the rest of the country is enjoying a holiday, the math in Washington, D.C. has reached a point of no return that would make our founding fathers' heads spin. Today, we are breaking down a fiscal milestone that should give every single American pause. We are looking at three stories that define the true state of our union in 2026. First, our anchor story. For the first time in modern history, the interest on our national debt has officially surpassed the entire budget for our national defense. We are now spending more on the cost of yesterday than we are on the security of today. Second, we're going to look at the Autopilot Crisis. While politicians argue over small discretionary items, 73% of our spending is now locked into Social Security, Medicare, and interest. I'll show you why doing nothing is actually the most radical choice Washington is making. And finally, we'll look at the global stage. As our debt hits $38.56 trillion, the status of the US dollar as the world's reserve currency is facing its biggest test yet. We'll talk about what happens if that trust finally breaks. If you're new here, I'm John Gray, and we're building a community of people who refuse to stand by while our nation's future is sold for short-term political gain. We need voices like yours in this fight for fiscal sanity. So please, hit that subscribe button and join us as we bridge the gap between rhetoric and reality. When we talk about the federal government, we usually focus on the shiny objects, the new laws being passed, the latest foreign aid debate, or a new infrastructure project. But there is a silent, growing force in our economy that is quickly becoming more significant than almost any legislative agenda. It is the cost of what has already been done. As of today, Monday, February 16th, 2026, we are staring at a number that is difficult to wrap the human mind around. The total gross national debt has reached $38.56 trillion. To put that in perspective for you, that is over $286,000 for every single household in the United States. If a bill for your share of the national debt arrived in your mailbox today, most families would be looking at a number larger than their mortgage. But the total debt is actually only half the story. The more immediate crisis is the interest. For decades, we were told by experts that debt didn't matter because interest rates were near zero. They called it free money. Well, the bill has come due. Because of the higher interest rate environment we've seen over the last few years, the cost to carry that debt just to pay the interest has exploded. In the current fiscal year, the United States is on track to spend over $1 trillion on interest alone. Let that sink in. $1 trillion. That is money that isn't building a single road, it isn't paying a single soldier's salary, and it isn't funding a single school. It is simply the price of admission for our past overspending. For the first time since the end of World War II, the interest we pay on our debt has eclipsed our entire national defense budget. We are essentially saying that servicing our creditors, many of whom are foreign adversaries like China, is a higher priority than the safety of our borders or the readiness of our military. This isn't just a budget problem, it is a national security crisis. Economists call this crowding out. Every dollar the government borrows is a dollar that isn't being invested in the private sector. It drives up the cost of borrowing for you, too. When the government has to compete for loans to cover its $1 trillion interest bill, your mortgage rates, your car loans, and your small business credits all feel the squeeze. You remember the 70s? You remember what it felt like when inflation was high and the government seemed to have no plan? We are seeing a modern version of that, but with much higher stakes. In the 1970s, our debt to GDP ratio was around 35%. Today, in 2026, it has soared past 120%. We are in uncharted waters, and the logic of printing our way out is failing. The interest spiral creates a feedback loop. We have to borrow money just to pay the interest on the money we already borrowed. This is the definition of a debt trap. If interest rates stay even slightly elevated, the interest bill will eventually become the single largest item in the entire federal budget. And that brings us to the second part of this crisis, the autopilot programs that Washington refuses to touch. When you hear politicians on the news shouting about budget cuts, they are usually talking about what's called discretionary spending. This is the part of the budget that Congress actually votes on every year, things like the FBI, the Park Service, or foreign aid. But here is the truth they won't tell you. Discretionary spending is a tiny and shrinking part of the pie. The real driver of our debt is mandatory spending, the programs on autopilot. As we stand here in February 2026, Social Security, Medicare, and now interest on the debt account for nearly 73% of all federal spending. That means before a single representative even walks onto the House floor, nearly 3/4 of your tax dollars are already gone. This is the third rail of politics. You've seen it 1,000 times. If a leader suggests even the slightest common sense reform to ensure these programs survive for our grandchildren, they are accused of cutting benefits for seniors. But let's use logic here. If we do nothing, the cut happens automatically. According to the latest trustees' reports, the Social Security Trust Fund is racing toward insolvency in the early 2030s. Doing nothing is a choice. It is a choice to allow a 20% across-the-board cut to hit every senior in America in less than 10 years. It is a choice to let the interest payments continue to devour the rest of the budget. The math in 2026 is cold and unforgiving. We have 10,000 people reaching retirement age every single day. The ratio of workers to retirees has dropped from 5-to-1 in the 1960s to less than 3-to-1 today. You can't fix that with a tax on the rich or by cutting waste and fraud. Those are slogans, not solutions. The solution requires what we call structural reform. It means looking at means testing for the wealthiest Americans, adjusting the retirement age for people who are currently in their 20s or 30s, and modernizing the way we deliver healthcare. But instead, we see the same politics of fear. Liberal talking points would have you believe that any change is an attack on the middle class. The reality, the attack on the middle class is the inflation caused by the debt that these programs are creating. We are essentially running a massive insurance company with a small army attached to it, and the insurance company is going broke. When 73 cents of every dollar is spoken for before the day begins, the government loses the ability to respond to new crises. Whether it's a new pandemic, a conflict in the Pacific, or a domestic disaster, our fiscal space has vanished. This lack of fiscal space doesn't just hurt us at home. It's beginning to erode our standing in the world. For the last 80 years, the United States has enjoyed a superpower status that isn't just about our military. It's about the US dollar. Because the dollar is the world's reserve currency, we have been able to borrow at lower rates than anyone else. Other countries have to hold dollars to buy oil and conduct trade, which creates a constant demand for our currency. But that trust is built on the assumption that the United States is the safest bet in the world. As our debt hits $38.56 trillion, that bet is looking riskier to the rest of the world. There is a movement called modern monetary theory that has gained traction in some liberal circles. They argue that because we print our own currency, we can never run out of money. Technically, that's true. We have a printing press, but you can't print value. When you print more dollars to pay off debt, you are devaluing every single dollar currently in your savings account. It's a hidden tax on every American who has worked hard and saved for retirement. If our creditors, the people who buy our treasury bonds, start to believe that we will simply print our way out of this $38 trillion hole, they will demand higher interest rates to compensate for the risk of inflation. That makes the interest spiral we talked about earlier even worse. We are already seeing nations like Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, the BRICS nations, actively looking for ways to trade without using the dollar. If the dollar loses its reserve status, the cost of everything you buy, from gasoline to groceries, will skyrocket because the dollar will lose its purchasing power globally. The exorbitant privilege we've enjoyed since 1944 is not a birthright. It is earned through fiscal discipline and a stable economy. By choosing to ignore the math of 2026, Washington is gambling with the very foundation of our global influence. When you look at these three stories, the interest surpassing defense, the autopilot spending reaching 73%, and the threat to the dollar, the theme is clear. The era of kick the can down the road has officially ended. The road has run out. This isn't a call for panic, but it is a call for a more serious, logic-based conversation. We cannot be a strong nation if we are a bankrupt nation. We cannot protect our borders if we are spending all our money on interest. And we cannot preserve the American dream for our children if we leave them a debt they can never hope to repay. But I want to know your thoughts. When you hear that we spend more on interest than on our own military, what is your first reaction? And do you think Washington has the courage to touch the autopilot programs before the trust funds go dry? Leave a comment below. I read as many as I can, and I want to hear your perspective. If you found this breakdown helpful, please share this video. The mainstream media won't give you the hard numbers, but we will. I'm John Gray. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one.